everyone. My name is Nuno, and welcome to the Reform Review. We have a lot to talk about this week, mostly because I'm a little bit confused of what's been happening in terms of immigration reform, but also in terms of news that's happened this week. A lot has been going on regarding President Biden, but also different Democratic senators, some for the good, which I'm happy to report on, and some more so for the bad, especially if you kind of glimpsed at the description of the video. Yeah, there is a bit of a bipartisan attack on refugees and asylum seekers, which I generally confused on and surprised as to why this would be the approach that Democrats would begin to support at all, but also not so surprised because considering who's involved, it makes some sense. So just to start, we're going to talk a little bit about a new report that came out talking about deaths in terms of border crossings at Arizona. Now, this shouldn't surprise anyone, especially considering how, I think we've lost a bit of a connection to one of our streams. So give me just 1 second. There we go. Should be fine. And this report is very recent, so it only came out a few days ago. And I will share it on my screen, the article talking about it, as I usually do. Now, again, this shouldn't surprise anyone. Usually on the show, we really hammer on the point that the policies that we put forward really does affect how people experience the journey to the U.S. And one of my biggest critiques of the Biden administration, and even some senators, Democratic senators out there, is that they are pushing the same policies that have led to a more difficult journey, which is the point that they're trying to get across, is that they want to make the journey more difficult without addressing the root causes of why people are coming here. And no matter how difficult you make the journey or the trip to get to the US, people will still take that challenge and come here for a better opportunity at life. And no surprise, now we're seeing these kind of reports saying that those who have tried to come across the Arizona borderlands have died at higher rates in the past 2 decades since stepped-up enforcement began funneling them into remote, hostile desert and mountain regions, a sweeping new analysis concluded Monday. So again, this is really going along the lines of our expectations, is that people are still coming to the U.S. They're still willing to risk their lives for a better opportunity here, no matter how difficult you make it through enforcement or strict regulations, or even through different punishments. And again, this is a new report from the University of Arizona by National Migration Institute. So this is, again, very concerning, especially when we see this next article I'm going to share here, which is that the Arizona governor, Doug Ducey, said Tuesday that he is sending 250 National Guard troops to the state's southern border with Mexico amid the increased arrivals of migrants. So you can see that especially the Republican mindset as they just continue upping enforcement with the myth, the idea, the false belief that this will somehow lead to a reduction in the number of migrants who will be coming here. Rather, we're seeing, as this report has stated, that it is only leading to an increase in death of people coming across the border. So, in a very morbid way, are they right that yes, we are reducing the number of people coming across and staying in the U.S.? Technically, yes, in a very morbid way, but that's because of death. So this is again not a way that we would ever or we should ever support. Again, this is the death of people coming across the border for the purpose of improving their life, to have an opportunity here in the U.S., not only for themselves, but in many cases for the family that they're choosing to leave behind in their home country. A very, very difficult choice. Just think about it. Put yourself in their situation as well. When you're facing violence, when you're facing even climate disasters, the 2 hurricanes that happened over the past months has led to people having to come out to leave their home because there's nothing there for them in their minds. They don't believe that they have an opportunity there. So again, increasing enforcement does not reduce immigration to the extent that it is worthwhile. Rather, it is only putting people at risk of death. So this is really what's come out this week. And again, this is very morbid, unfortunate, but it's not surprising. We should not be surprised by this kind of a finding. It's what we would expect. People will come regardless. And since this is a bit of a morbid way to begin the news segment, I do want to shift to a little bit more of positive news. I think the past couple of shows have been rather saddening to an extent, so I did want to maybe change this week's approach a little bit. I'm going to share another article here, which is pretty good news, I would say. It's very welcoming. Now, there's nothing set in stone yet. However, President Biden, his administration, has announced that they're going to increase the number of temporary seasonal workers who will be allowed to work in the U.S. This year as the U.S. economy recovers from the pandemic. We've recently hit a milestone of 200 million vaccines delivered to U.S. citizens, so that's an amazing place to be. All credit to the administration for the quick rollout. And this is an even better sign, is that, as it says here, there will be an approval of an additional 22,000 H-2B seasonal non-agricultural worker visas on top of the annual limit of 66,000 already set by Congress. So we are looking forward to this. I think it's great. As it also mentions in here that the H-2B program has bipartisan support. So it is a program that we don't expect many Republicans to be against in terms of upping this kind of a cap. It is amazing, just amazing that the administration is really thinking forward, that as we recover economically from the pandemic, that we do need more workers to come and help us with the jobs that many times U.S. citizens do not want to take on, but immigrants are willing to do for us to get this country moving. This is also in the similar thinking of why the Biden administration and Congress have been considering a pathway to citizenship for essential workers, with the same mentality that they were helping us keep the economy going during the COVID pandemic. And so they will be even more important during the recovery phase, since we are now headed towards that direction. So credit where it's due, all right? I think that this would be an amazing step forward if the Biden administration actually goes ahead with it. So we'll keep an eye on this, look at the news to see if there's any updates going forward. More positive news. Again, we're going to make this a feel-good kind of a weekend before we get into the immigration reform side. But until then, immigration news will be a little bit more positive. And we're going to talk about this other article where there was a climate change summit, I believe yesterday, and maybe today is the remnants of it. Thursday and Friday, rather. So Thursday and Friday, there was a climate summit. And we have Senator Ed Markey, so Edward Markey. I'm going to expand this article for you to also look along. But he had promised to introduce, or rather reintroduce, legislation to rewrite the way that we view refugees, in the sense that we need to recognize that climate change has led to an increase in migration and migrants seeking refuge here in the U.S., and especially since we are rather a large producer of carbon, which is leading to a lot of this, it is part of our responsibility to address this climate change. And so he actually did follow through, and I did get a chance to read a little bit of the legislation. And again, it is a good one. I'm glad that this is being addressed because as we face climate change and it becomes rather our existential crisis as not just the U.S., but also human race across the entire world, this is something important to recognize. And the sooner we can change our policies, our laws to reflect that people aren't just going to be fleeing their homes for the very conventional common reasons, which again is like violence or really violence and other reasons. Rather that climate change, right? Your ability to even live in a country can be affected through natural disasters that are being exacerbated by climate change. So we're going to keep an eye on this, and hopefully it can go forward. I believe he had originally introduced it in 2019, and it didn't really have any traction. Now that President Biden has made it a rather iconic part of his campaign to try and fight against climate change and introduce new legislation to help us combat it, There is some hope that this may also be considered. Again, it's not 100%. I just want to at least bring it up, let you know that this is something that's happening, since it is something that could be very important and really redefine U.S. Refugee policies going forward. Our immigration system would be radically different if this were to be in place. The last piece of good news is involving the Department of Homeland Security, so DHS, and in terms of their policies. This is also very important. I'll switch over to it. But the DHS, so Department of Homeland Security, announced that they are formally removing civil penalties for failure to depart. So this is in the case of immigrants who have been told that they need to leave the U.S., and if they do not, they would be facing a civil penalty. So that means a fee would have to be paid. Sometimes it would be crazy, right? So thousands and thousands of dollars. Other times it could have been a little bit smaller. But they actually stopped enforcing this rule back on January 20th of this year, which obviously is when President Biden came into power. So it does seem that this was a Trump exclusive policy because it did begin in 2018, it says here. But I did want to read a little bit here. But just so you know, this really began 2018. They had the ability to do this for the past 20 years, according to this article. And again, this is from the Department of Homeland Security, so it's all accurate. So for the past 20 years, they had the power to do it. And they only chose to apply this during the Trump presidency. So it's not uncommon to go back. So that's a good thing. And I'm glad that we're going backwards on this, undoing this Trump policy. And this is from the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas. He says that there is no indication that these penalties promoted compliance with non-citizens' departure obligations. We can enforce our immigration laws without resorting to ineffective and unnecessary punitive measures. So what this means is that, yes, if you are still required by the Department of Homeland Security to leave, you'll still have to leave, right? This is in no way telling you that you are now allowed to remain in the U.S. However, you will not be forced to pay some kind of fee as punishment for not going as quickly as they would like. So this is great. Another good news, I would say, in terms of the change in DHS's stance. Again, I do want to remind you that as much credit as where it's due, fine, but the Department of Homeland Security, especially ICE, still have a lot of people who want to enforce based on their own personal beliefs. And especially since, well, I believe a couple of unions had endorsed President Trump and his campaign and for his reelection, it's no surprise that agents, right, so ICE agents particularly, are favorable of Trump's policies and have been trying to continue them despite being told to stop. We covered one of those kinds of news articles, I believe, in last week's coverage or maybe the week before. Feel free to check it out. If you're on YouTube, it's a little bit easier. You can just click one of the suggested videos. But point being is that progress is being made. So that's the good thing. It's just more a question of how long-lasting will it be? Will it leave during the next Democratic president who may be a little bit more open to the idea of a stricter immigration? Or will it completely change if another Republican president is in office? That's the questions we need to be asking. So good for now. Let's see how long this will last. But overall, that is the news coverage for the week. Now, if you saw the title of this video, you probably were wondering why I'm so confused by what's going on with immigration reform. And it's a bit confusing. I'll put it that way, right? We can all be confused together. Now, to just kind of help explain what is happening, I do want to pull up an article over here, but talk to you just a little bit separately. Is that last week I covered that not much has happened in the world of immigration reform. Now that continues to be the case. If I pull up sort of like all my different banners to help guide us in this, when it comes to the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, no progress. There hasn't really been much talk right now. When it comes to the DREAM Act, same issue. American Dream and Promise Act, same issue. No real progress. When you look at the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, also no progress, which is surprising because it had really strong bipartisan support, mostly, I would imagine, because of the E-Verify requirements, which would spread across all the agricultural sector. Again, I personally do not support this. I think it's a bad piece of legislation because of that. It would punish all undocumented immigrants going forward. And I think when we're trying to do comprehensive immigration reform that is humane, you should not do that. Where then later on in the future, we will be fighting against the same thing that we would put in place right now. It makes no sense. But that's an aside. Last thing we've heard about from the Republican dignity proposal, nothing, right? They have not even introduced it formally as legislation. But I do want to come back now to this, right? We covered this a little bit more in detail last week in terms of the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. But I do want to give a little bit of an update on that because that also came up in the news and explains sort of my the title of this video and the description. But to take a look, we're going to look at this article here together. In that on the past Tuesday, so this past Tuesday, the 21st of April, we had a couple of Latino lawmakers from the Hispanic caucus meet with the president, and they actually urged him to include this pathway to citizenship for essential workers, right? So undocumented essential workers, into his next infrastructure bill, because Democrats have two options, right? They have two things that they could do. They can either go down a normal route where they have to by force get 10 Republican senators to approve of this legislation, the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. Now, is that likely? No. And we'll cover this slightly in the next article, which will unfortunately make this seem a little bit bad. But it is very, very unlikely, unfortunately, that we will ever get 10 Republican senators to pass immigration reform through a normal means. So this general route, most likely, it's impossible to go forward with it. The second option is through budget reconciliation, because budget reconciliation only requires a 50-50 vote in the Senate. So instead of going for 60, you just need 50. The tiebreaker would be the Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, who of course would support the president's agenda, which would then push us over what we need. Now, there's a couple of issues with the reconciliation process, is that it requires all Democrats to be on the same page and vote in the same way. Now, we're going to talk about this particular Democratic senator in a few minutes, but you have people like Kyrsten Sinema, right? So Senator Sinema, who's a Democrat, but she governs along the lines of a Republican, similar to Manchin, who's a common topic on the show. And that's very unfortunate because it does put at risk any kind of immigration reform going forward, because the Democratic Senator Sinema, all she has to do is say, well, I want bipartisan support, so I will not support anything that does not have one Republican senator who supports it, similar to something that Manchin has said in the past. And that's what we're seeing here. Now, the Hispanic caucus did meet with President Biden. He said, or they claim that he said he was open to the idea of pushing this through budget reconciliation, that this might be a possibility for us to actually have this go forward. Unfortunately, and I'll share this on my screen here, there's another article that came out the day after where the White House press secretary Jen Psaki was asked about Biden's stance. And unfortunately, as it says here, Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the administration remains focused on finding a bipartisan path forward on immigration instead of using a special budget procedure called reconciliation. The budget rule would allow Democrats to pass legislation with a simple majority vote in the Senate and without any Republican support. So that is the bad news. So we had a little bit of hope on Tuesday and had it dashed almost immediately on Wednesday as the White House backed away from this. As it says here, Psaki indicated the White House isn't ready to go that route yet in terms of reconciliation. The conversation should not be about a reconciliation process. It should be about moving forward in a bipartisan manner. Now, if you've watched this show a couple times, you know my issue with the idea of bipartisan in our current time. Maybe if you were talking about this, 50 years ago, then sure, you have a shot at bipartisanship. Now we are very, very polarized, especially after 4 years of former President Trump, his administration. We have a fight between Democrats and Republicans that we have not seen since really the early foundings of the country. Again, this is the issue with party politics. You choose a team and you stick with it. But again, this is why on this show, at least, we equally criticize both parties, Democrats and Republicans, because our goal is comprehensive immigration reform, regardless of who does it. As long as it is comprehensive and humane, that's all we want. So this is not really surprising to me. President Biden has stated in the past that he does not really want to be going through these kind of more nuclear options where it completely walls off the opposing party. He wants bipartisanship. So what does this mean? Well, one, it could mean that he is just trying to make sure that Republicans do not start to campaign against these kinds of reforms. And then later on, similar to what happened with the COVID relief bill, which also had to go through reconciliation, it will pass anyway through that process. So that might be what he's doing. Me, I tend to be a little bit more cynical, unfortunately. So sorry if that's not your thing. I worry that this is more of the final sign showing that unless we can get one Republican to say yes, that President Biden and other Democrats will use that as an excuse and say that they cannot support something that does not have bipartisan support behind it, and it's really on us as common people who have, who can only organize and push people as far as we can. That is on us to go and do that. So I think this is real shifting of the burden of what needs to be done. President Biden campaigned with the promise of comprehensive immigration reform, and now he's just completely abandoning it and saying he's not going to fight for it for us. He's just going to leave it up to us to have to go and beg for dignity and respect for hardworking people who just want an opportunity to be here in this country. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that that's the point of electing someone, especially when they campaign on that kind of a promise. So we really do need to keep attention here. We need to organize. We need to start calling every single day if that's what it takes, not only to elected representatives, right, in Congress, also write a letter to Biden and tell him stop abandoning us. Really, that's really what it comes down to, is that he needs to understand that we're watching him, and he's the one who's going to be held responsible if these kinds of measures do not pass. Because this, if you did not catch last week's segment, this would help 5.2 million undocumented immigrants in this country. That's just how the bare minimum of who could qualify for this kind of help. So please, this is something important that we need to fight for right now. Because if we cannot get this comprehensive immigration reform through the U.S. Citizenship Act, which would help everyone, all 11 million, this is at least a better first step to make sure that we have some kind of progress going forward. Otherwise, if we start to fold and we're not bold in trying to push forward more progressive, humane ideas, we are always going to keep shifting ourselves more to the right, to this more conservative idea that we need to be strict with immigrants. We have to punish them, and we have to punish future immigrants who are coming to this country, and that's something we cannot allow. So do keep that in mind. Whatever we allow to go through right now is going to be the basis for our arguments later in the future when we want more. So if we only help people with DACA, then that's all we're going to be able to help in the future. And again, on this show, we always say the same thing. DACA recipients deserve pathway to citizenship. TPS holders, agricultural workers, they all deserve the same pathway to citizenship, but also all undocumented immigrants in this country deserve a pathway to citizenship, and all immigrants deserve a humane immigration system that does not have them waiting decades to be processed, forcing them to feel that there's no other option but to come here illegally or in an unauthorized manner. So please keep that in mind. And again, this is really the update for this because we do have something new, and I think our list of reform bills grows every single week almost, which is perfectly fine. That's part of why I'm here, to make sure that you're updated on everything that's happening. But I do want to talk about something called the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act. Now, this would not be a reform bill, so this isn't going to affect a pathway to citizenship or really reform the immigration system as a whole. This is more focused on what's happening at the border, but I did want to bring it up just because of the implications of what it is and what it means going forward, especially for rather moderate Democratic representatives like Kirsten Sinema, who's co-sponsoring this bill, which is why it's bipartisan. So let's talk a little bit about that and where did it actually come from? Because if you're unaware, I'm going to quickly share this and give you just a little bit of the context before we really talk about why this is bad. Why this is such a bad Act. In my opinion, I mean, I will still have to always put that, it's my opinion, but I think you'll probably come to the same conclusion here. So a bipartisan group of senators met privately on Wednesday to talk about where they can kind of meet in the middle ground, right? So this is Republicans and Democrats who met together. Now, the list of who showed up there is included here on this article. I'll just quickly read their names. So this is Cornyn, Durbin. So Durbin, if you recognize his name, he's the sponsor for the DREAM Act, the standalone DREAM Act of 2021 and previous versions. We also had Senators Chris Coons, a Democrat, Patrick Leahy, a Democrat, Michael Bennet, Alex Padilla, Bob Menendez. So Bob Menendez, the sponsor of the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, Ben Ray Lujan, Catherine Cortez Masto, and Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Lindsey Graham. So a lot more Democrats, but at least there were some Republicans. And here we had Senator Mike Rounds, who's a Republican from South Dakota, I believe. Yeah. And Kirsten Sinema, right? So from Arizona. So what came about this? Nothing. To put it in a very straightforward way, not to waste too much time on this. But this is the reason why I bring this up is because Kirsten Sinema was there. And the result of this, in the immediate comments, and I'll read this here, is that there was a bit of a divide on what to do, in the sense that nothing came out of this in terms of the actual acts of what we would want. For example, here you have Durbin saying, I'll expand this up for you to actually see it. Durbin said, "We did not reach any conclusions, but we put many ideas on the table, and we're going to invite the administration to look at them and join us in this conversation." So he puts it in a little bit of a more positive twist. However, this doesn't match with what the Republican Cornyn said. And he says down here that in terms of Durbin thinking that the bills already introduced, so all the bills we've covered, that's a good starting point, he kind of counters that point immediately and says, "I think that'd be a mistake. There wouldn't be any support for the House bills." So what came out of this bipartisan meeting was absolutely nothing. It's very, very clear at this point that Republicans cannot fall in line with Democrats on having a more humane approach towards immigration reform. So instead of doing something more humane and making sure that we aren't punishing immigrants for something out of their control, we now have this, which is a separate meeting between bipartisan senators and even House representatives that they now introduce their own standalone bill, the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act, to address the border crisis as it stands. So who is this sponsored by? Well, you have Senators John Cornyn, so again, one of the leaders of that bipartisan talk, who's a Republican from Texas, by the way, and Kirsten Sinema. Wow, look at that, Democrat from Arizona. They co-sponsored this bill and have now already put it in. So it's completely written up. It's full legislation introduced into Congress. I even have a copy here. You can see it's 71 pages long. So a rather lengthy bill for what it is. And so just to help us not have to read through this whole thing, especially because it really came out of nowhere, and so even I didn't have a chance to fully read through it, Senator Sinema produced her own summary of what is included in this bill. And I'll quickly zoom in here. Now, to be very honest with you, this bill has some good elements to it. Very, very small pieces that I'll highlight in here. But the rest of the bill is very, very toxic and a danger to not only refugees, asylum seekers who are coming to this country because of the different provisions that it tries to push forward, which are really out of, if you were to take Trump's policies from before, they would kind of match exactly where this is going. So it is wrapped in language that is very kind, makes it seem like it's so good for immigrants, but then in actual practice, when you read, right, because again, this is the summary produced by Democratic Senator Sinema and Cornyn's team, along with other representatives. This is what they put together to try and persuade you that what they're trying to push forward is not horribly bad for you or for future asylum seekers. It really is. And we'll go into a little bit detail of that. But first, I do want to highlight what's good, right? The good points that we should take out of this, make it standalone, or things that are already going to be included in bigger comprehensive reforms, such as the US Citizenship Act of 2021. Some of it is already in there. But let's look here. So if we scroll down a bit, you'll see here, let me see, which one was it? Here. This I can agree with completely. So let's go with that first. So this is legal orientation and access to counsel. I'll expand this a little bit more and zoom in. Also, if at any point you can't read something on my screen, make sure to just comment it below. I'm always watching comments, and I can always expand the size of different articles. Also, you can say hi if you would like to. I'm also open to talking with you guys. Now, in terms of this first point, which I'm in agreement with, is that it would require widespread improvements to legal orientation and access to counsel across the Department of Homeland Security to improve fairness for asylum seekers. This includes improved language translation services, legal orientation programs, and updates to facility standards and procedures to ensure that migrants can privately meet and speak with outside counsel prior to appearing before an asylum officer or immigration judge. If you're unfamiliar with the process as it stands, immigrants who are not authorized to be in the country typically do not have access to legal counsel. They would do it on their own private merit. So if they have money and resources to do it, then they could afford to have one. But it is not like a U.S. citizen who has the right, the right given to them by the Constitution to have legal representation assigned to them when they have to go appear before a court. There have been other bills in the past introduced to try and accomplish this goal of providing legal resources to immigrants. It's also included in the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, which is why this show in particular promotes it so much. So again, this one piece, we are in agreement. I think it is an important piece that needs to be pushed forward. If we can take this, pull it out, make it its own separate bill, great. If not, this is not the way to go inside of this particular bill. The second thing I would agree with, I'll scroll down here, is here. Hiring authorities. Now, this is a bit of a mixed bag, so some I agree with, some I don't. But the portion inside of this, which is to hire 150 immigration judge teams. Let me expand this very quickly so you can see. 300 asylum officers. This particular piece involves trying to reinforce the processing system to make sure that immigrants are not waiting a long time for their case to be heard and to be processed. So if we can continue to fund the immigration court system to make sure that the backlog can be addressed, great. I think that's a perfect point, and something that we always something that's always raised on this show week to week is the need to address the immigration court backlog. Hello, Jimin. Thank you for commenting there. And so that's the thing we have to recognize, is that there is some good, right? There is I would say very small good to this particular act because, well, again, the rest of it, not that great, especially one point I'll highlight up here, which I can see the abuse going to happen. But more better than my opinion, I'm going to bring up a different organization's opinion, which is a little bit more centered. But here, let's see, right here. Yeah, this one in particular, not that great looking, not the thing that we would want coming out of this. It says improvements to credible fear determinations and the asylum process. Authorizes the Department of Homeland Security to conduct pilot programs to improve the asylum process to render fair and efficient credible fear determinations and such. What does this mean? Well, on this paper, right, as it's written right now, it doesn't really give you much detail, right, because it's just a summary. However, when you actually look at the legislative bill, you'll see that it's almost as if you're trying to rush whether or not someone who's applying for asylum on the basis of fear, if they would be able to qualify. Well, it is as if they're trying to speed run it and push it as fast as possible. I believe it's only 72 hours they would have to determine whether or not they would qualify for this. And it's not that they would go and they're already situated and then they get to wait to hear it, whether or not this is going to go forward. It's almost immediately from the time that they're in custody, straight away to their determination of whether or not they can stay. The thing is that people are traumatized. Right? Let's be very frank here. Asylum seekers are traumatized not only by what has happened in their home country, but also through the journey to get to the US, especially as we push forward rather restrictive policies that make the journey harder, which means let's make the journey more dangerous and deadly to them. This traumatizes a lot of the immigrants who are coming. So if you're saying, let's take them in a traumatized state, within 72 hours we had to determine whether or not they get to stay here, that they have to fight their own case, that's not very humane, not very smart in general, really, because you completely remove the fact that they cannot adequately defend themselves while traumatized. So this is really very, very concerning, especially on other language of how they would rework this kind of a system. And this is only probably the worst offense, I would say. Not even really. That's the thing. Like, this whole bill in itself is full of different restrictive approaches, which is why I say that Democrats have really started to lose their mind. Not only is the White House trying to backstep their support for a pathway to citizenship for essential workers, again, that would help 5.2 million people finally be able to live in this country in peace. They are now also signaling that they might want to go along this kind of a route, which is just give Republican and conservative members everything that they want in a way to punish asylum seekers and refugees, really immigrants who are coming to this country to flee violence or terrible conditions in their home country. This makes completely no sense, and it just shows that you have certain Democrats, right? So Democrats who would much rather cater to a new base of support for themselves, so Republican voters or Trump voters, through these kind of measures, rather than actually helping immigrants. If I can put this up here, it really is a thing of wanting to sacrifice immigrants for votes. It is that kind of a decision. That's the level of cynicism that comes from this. And that's why I can publicly say right now, just shame on Senator Sinema for even thinking that this was a good idea. If this is the basis of what her political view is when it comes to immigration, then this is just a shame. And I cannot expect much from her at this point. The fact that this is what they could come up with, and this is what she is willing to publicly support as one of the only things she's been willing to fight for, just a shame and a half on her. Not only for other things that she's done against U.S. workers when it came to the $15 minimum wage bill that she very happily voted against. This is just more symptoms that we can see from these moderate Democrats really being just Republican representatives with a Democratic face who will lie to you and say that they're trying to help you, wrap their message in nice sounding language, but in actuality, they are attacking refugees, they're attacking asylum seekers, they're attacking immigrants and our community. So I have nothing really else to say about this in particular. I do want to share the opinion from a different organization. Again, they word it a lot better than I can, so I will read a little bit more of it directly to you, just so you can really understand. According to the Human Rights First organization, this bill is right out of the Trump administration's playbook. It would lead to an immediate deportation of refugees seeking protection despite their legitimate fears of persecution. The last thing our laws should do is turn U.S. asylum assessments into rapid deportation devices aimed at deterring people from seeking refuge. Instead, legislative action should be focused on building a fair, timely, and humane asylum system that welcomes people seeking refuge with dignity and preventing a future administration from rigging asylum adjudications against refugees so they are turned back to persecution and danger. So this is really what we're dealing with now. It is an attack by the Republican Party against immigrants, but also within the Democratic Party, who are willing to sacrifice immigrants in order to gain political votes. It's not all of them, I'll put that out there. It's not all Democratic representatives who are doing this, but it is becoming concerning that Democratic senators, those who have so much power to block all these immigration reform bills, are willing to propose something like this in order to gain a political edge and hold up all progress going forward. So we need to really keep an eye on this, see whether or not it's going to be pushed forward, because it was introduced in both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. I worry that Democrats will think that this is a good bipartisan way of getting us to finally move on reform elsewhere. My expectation is that if they believe that, they're fools. They're going to push forward this, damage the immigration system even further for immigrants who are seeking refuge here. And then later on, Republicans will still block every single measure for immigration reform. I fully believe in that. And this is why we need to hold them accountable for even thinking that this was a good idea. So Kyrsten Sinema, Democratic senator, needs to be held accountable, because not only is she fighting against working people in this country, now she's attacking immigrants as well. She's attacking everyone who could benefit from any change in this country. And that's just shame on her completely. But that aside, that's really the reform update. This is just something that came up. Again, this will not affect the entire immigration system, but it will still hurt many immigrants who are coming to this country for an opportunity. So I did want to bring it up because it is rather concerning going forward. Now, I do want to end this in a little bit of a lighter note, I would say, just because I think that we went from, I believe, bad news to good news to bad news. Now I want to end on some good news in terms of our campaign to try and get support for immigration reform in this country. And to do that, I want to share one last thing on my screen before I kind of close it out. And it is this. If you remember this is the campaign page for our petition. And if you can see there on the right, probably can't really see that well there, but I'll share it there. There we go. Is that we're almost at 12,000 signatures in support of immigration reform. The last time I really did an update, I think we were only at 6,000. So this is really amazing. And I want to say that this is all thanks to you, right? So thank you so much for all that you've done in terms of sharing, in terms of actually signing it if you have. If you haven't had a chance to, in the description, I included the link, the direct link to this petition. It's also included on our website of how to take action if you would prefer it that way. But please, if you haven't had a chance to sign it, do so. It means a lot. We're able to pressure different representatives this way. And we're also trying to reach out to the media to cover this campaign, to cover what we're doing, to really push it forward. And again, the whole point of this is to pressure representatives to actually fulfill their promise, to make sure that not only our congressional representatives, especially someone like Senator Sinema, who to actually do their job and help these immigrants who are in need, but also President Biden to stop abandoning his promises from his campaign and push representatives in line to fight for immigration reform that's comprehensive, that will help all 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, but also all immigrants who are trying to come here through an authorized means, so that they're not waiting decades and decades just to be processed and then maybe even told no at the end. So that's what we're trying to fight against. And this is what we're fighting for, is to push people, push them to do the job that they were sent to Congress to do. So if you want to see that, I'm going to share it here too. But again, it's in the description, direct link. Feel free to share it. It would mean the world to me and also to the campaign and to all the people who could benefit from this kind of reform. Again, amazing. I never thought that we would make it to this many signatures, so almost at 12,000. So please feel free to share that and also share this video in general. That would help a lot. If you're watching on Facebook, great. Make sure to like the page, share it out, tell people that we're really trying to make a change here. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't already, remember to, subscribe if you can, like the video. And yes, Jimin, I'll share you right here. I do remember when it's really not that many signatures. That was a while ago now. It's been a few months of doing this. But it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling that we are making a change right now. We are really pushing this forward. And I think that this is the way that we need to go. We need to organize and keep pushing now more than ever. As I always say, now is always the best time to make a change. It's never about doing it later when we have no chance at all. So please keep on going. If you want to take action yourself, there's another way that you can do it. You can also call or email your representative. If you do not know their name, by the way, we have some instructions on our website, which is scrolling across the screen, or you can find it in the description, also included there. This is a general number, 202-224-3121. If you call it, you'll be connected to the Congressional Switchboard, which is a more general number where all you need is the representative's name. So Representative something something, or Senator Sinema, for example. Now I'll use her as my example going forward. You can call her directly by telling her name to this switchboard. They'll connect you directly. You'll most likely speak with an aide or have to leave a message. But all you have to do is explain, I support immigration reform. You can mention a specific bill. If you want the DREAM Act, the American Dream and Promise Act, Farm Workforce Modernization Act, we have so many bills to choose from. Or if you want, you can support the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 and say, I support comprehensive immigration reform for all immigrants in this country. And I demand that Senator Sinema do the same, or whoever your representative is. Feel free to do so. Less than 5 minutes, you can make a change now. And as usual, I think that's where we'll leave it off. It was a bit of a long program, but I think this is always important information to cover. If you are interested in the pathway to citizenship for essential workers, by the way, I will be doing a separate standalone analysis of it, trying to explain to you who's eligible under it, who wouldn't be, and sort of any kind of cutoffs to the program and exactly what does it do, especially as we're considering, or rather the Congress is considering putting it into the next infrastructure bill, which would be coming up rather soon. So if you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments, or just in general, send us a message through the Facebook page. That's probably a quick way to get into contact with us, and I'll make sure to get that done. It will most likely be midweek. If not, I'll probably dedicate the next segment towards it, although I believe I'll be traveling next Saturday. So it will be a little bit weird. I'll probably have to do a pre-recorded live kind of thing, but regardless, we'll continue to update you on all the changes that are coming forward. But for now, I think that's really where we're going to leave it off. So as always, thank you so much for being here with me, week in, week out, kind of a thing. It means a lot. And especially if you're able to share this kind of a video out to the people that you know, and really share your opinions with me. I think that that's another important thing. I want to hear from you what you think about immigration reform. How can we do better? If you want me to cover anything, let me know in the comments below or send me a message, okay? Other than that, I think we'll really leave it off there. So thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you again next weekend, or tomorrow if you're watching the Spanish version. Same time, 1:30 p.m. If you're in Seattle or sort of California, 4:30 p.m. if you're on the New Jersey, New York side. So see you tomorrow or next week. Bye-bye for now.